There's a global race on taking that compute technology that we built here in the US and doing transformational things with it. There are adversaries in the world, especially China, who have declared that they will dominate in the AI space by 2030.
Right.
The National Security Commission on AI took a hard look at this around 2021 to 2022, and they said in this global scale, there were 6 structural features that they looked at, and most players in the world could not compete with the US, save China. China's ahead in half the features, the US is ahead in half the features. Who wins is a toss-up. So the Department of Energy has stepped up and said, we know how to do computing at enormous scale. We understand what the national security needs are for the country. We're in a unique position to bring together the compute capability and that awareness of those missions and put it together and do something productive. So fast is the answer to that.
Hi, I wanted to jump in and give a shout out to our sponsor, SysAid. SysAid's vision is to lead organizations on a transformative journey toward AI-driven organizational processes and services, infusing intelligence and ease in the workday with SysAid Copilot. SysAid orchestrates service management across the organization using generative AI that taps into specialized data accumulated from thousands of customers and millions of users. With zero setup required, SysAid's conversational AI manages employees' requests, assists with queries, and accelerates the resolution of issues. IT pros and service management leaders become pioneers, enabling productivity to thrive. Now employees can do what they're meant to do, and organizations are free to fulfill their purpose. Give SysAid a try.
Hi, Craig. Thanks for having me. My name is Brian Spears. I'm the director of the AI Institutional Initiative at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Our institutional initiative drives AI into all of our science missions at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, where our central concerns are national security science. The principal one is stewarding the nation's nuclear stockpile. Until recently, I was the deputy lead for modeling and simulation in our ICF Inertial Confinement fusion program. That's the program that we use to achieve fusion ignition. That is, we got out of a nuclear fuel target more energy by fusion than what we actually put in by our laser driver. We did that at the end of 2022. My background that gives me the ability and the privilege to work on that comes from having gotten a PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of California at Berkeley. Although I was an engineer, my research was in nonlinear dynamical systems and high-dimensional topology for dynamical systems, so a bit of an applied mathematician. And I have, since I graduated with my PhD and started at Livermore, been a physicist working in the fusion space. So no one knows whether I'm a mathematician, engineer, or physicist, and I sort of like to defy categorization.
Yeah, and the AI initiative, is that how does that relate to the fusion ignition?
So they're pretty intimately linked. There are 2 pieces of the world. So let me tell you a little bit about the fusion, then I'll tell you about the AI and how they're coupled together. To achieve fusion ignition for the first time, DOE, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, has spent 60 years, 6 decades, going from the invention of the laser to using lasers to compress fuel targets with nuclear fuel in them, to just recently, almost 2 years ago, year and a half, igniting that to get more energy out than what we put in. To do that, we have 2 principal pieces of what we do. One is enormous scale experiments. So the National Ignition Facility, the laser where we do this, is a 10-story high football stadium size facility that you could lay 3 football fields across the top of. That generates more precise experimental data than most humans can imagine. The other piece that we use is the world's largest high-performance computing and simulation capabilities. So we have tens of thousands of GPUs that are coupled together to do physics simulations. So we can literally blow up a tiny target with a laser, and we can simulate the details down to the micron scale with picosecond or even femtosecond resolution of exactly what's going to happen. Now, what about the AI? What do we do with that? We now introduce AI into the middle of those 2 things. So an AI model can be trained on hundreds of thousands of simulations, the things that we think the world should do. We can build what we think of as a perfect AI surrogate, and that's fantastic, but it's still wrong. If our simulation codes were perfect, we wouldn't need the experimental capability. So now what do? We look at the experimental data, and we take that AI model trained on simulation, And we partially retrain that on the sparse but really high precision experimental data. And then that AI model is now what I call an elevated model. It understands the theory, the lay of the land, the way we expect the world to work from simulation, but it makes precise and accurate corrections based on the experimental data. So now when I use that elevated AI model, I get a picture of what I actually think is going to occur in the experimental facility based on previous experimental data. And that model we used, both the simulation piece and the experimental piece joined in that AI model, we used to help make a prediction about what we expected to happen before we had ever shot or fielded that target that ignited. And that model said on the weeks before, the night before we ran it again, that model said the most likely outcome was that for the first time in human history, we would ignite one of these things. And we woke up the next morning at 4:30 in the morning, the way you do when you're anxious and you know a shot happens overnight, and looked to see, and indeed, that is what happened. Now, the AI was critical, but we have other ways of seeing this too. The simulations by themselves were starting to say, hey, this is looking promising. The experimental record that we had suggested that we were also moving in the direction of ignition. And then we had this new third way that was integrating both that said, indeed, those things are consistent with each other, and you should probably start betting for this rather than against it, which after 18 years of not igniting something, it was pretty satisfying to do that. We've now repeated that 5 times, and our models have suggested that that would be the outcome. So we have this increasingly confident predictive capability that we can detect and predict what's going to happen the next time we do it. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. We are still pushing as hard as we can to improve that process, but we're getting real benefit out of high performance computing experiment with AI as the glue that's holding it together.
Yeah, and so does that create kind of a loop that every time you do an experiment that the predictions have shown would be promising, and there's some delta between the simulation and the reality, that you can close that gap a little?
That's right. Yeah. Every time we do another experiment, we learn a little more. Sometimes that experiment is what you might call a success, and the target actually ignites. Then we use that and we can go back and make the model better. Sometimes the targets do not ignite, and then those are probably in the long run even more valuable, because we start to learn that there was something that we didn't detect in the experiment that we need to account for, and we can usually go back and find that. Mm-hmm. Or there was something in the simulation that we were approximating that we're going to have to stop and get better at. Or we just weren't reconciling the two of them carefully, and those were actually potentially at odds with one another. So yeah, now, sort of presaging what happens in the AI world to come in the future, the National Ignition Facility, or NIF, can fire a shot once a week at that very largest scale where we can ignite, or for smaller, slightly less ambitious experiments, sometimes we can do shots 3 times a day. There are facilities now in the world that we call high repetition rate laser facilities. They actually fire at hertz. So you do the same thing that I just described, make a prediction, fire an experiment, look at that delta that you talked about, or the discrepancy, and then choose the next place to go. But the next experiment has to be planned 100 milliseconds later. So you can't have me make a decision about that. So what do? We have started to train AI agents to help us look at that outcome and the delta, and then choose the next experiment in order to make the outcome what we want to be better. So we've done this running hundreds of experiments over the course of minutes or a fraction of an hour, far faster than what we could do at the National Ignition Facility, to prove these concepts out. Now, the lasers that go fast are small. They're very high powers, but they deliver a tiny amount of energy in an even tinier amount of time. So it might be a joule laser, or maybe even up to a kilojoule laser, which is 1,000 joules. Right. The National Ignition Facility is a 2 megajoule laser or 2 million joule laser. And the difference for 1 million times in energy is the difference between I can make something really hot versus at the National Ignition Facility, I can make it hotter and denser than the center of the sun or of stars. So we are not yet in the place where I can take NIF and operate it at 10 times per second. That's where we want the world to go. And in fact, if you do that, if you can get fusion ignition to operate at about 10 times per second or 10 hertz, then what you have is a commercially viable fusion energy source. So now that's a nice outcome from the National Ignition Facility. Its primary focus is generating fusion conditions that we know to represent key challenges for the nation's nuclear stockpile and strategic deterrent. We are using that today. In fact, on the very first ignition experiment, we took what we call failure mode diagnostics off of that experiment, and we put on a national security package, and we exposed a material we were interested in to the conditions that are consistent with environments we're interested in for nuclear weapons and their applications. One, because we had the confidence and we thought we could do a secondary experiment there. And two, because once you do, you can directly answer questions for the stockpile that previously you would have either needed codes to predict or simulations, which are not quite good enough by themselves, or you would have needed underground nuclear test data. And we don't do nuclear testing anymore.
Yeah, and what are you trying to predict on the stockpile? Whether they're still viable or...
We have all kinds of questions that we answer about stockpile stewardship. We make sure that the stockpile is safe, that it is part of what we call the always never. Those systems should always be used when the nation demands them. They should never be available to be used if we don't want them to be. And what we're working on hard is to have a very capable strategic deterrent so that no one uses those weapons across the world. So the questions that we answer surround the way that materials age, the way that they react to environments that are harsh, that are filled with neutrons and radiation sources. And they help us understand how to design systems that have a longer lifetime, how to reuse parts from the stockpile in weapon systems that make us more effective as an enterprise, and just how to design systems that are effective and safe for the strategic deterrent mission.
And on the ignition, I didn't understand that because there's this brief spark where you're getting more energy out than is going in. I thought the goal was then to create a sustained fusion reaction. But what you're saying is you just want these sparks in close temporal proximity, and that's enough to get energy out. You don't need a sustained fusion reaction.
That's right? That's right. So there are two approaches to fusion. One is magnetic confinement fusion, and there the process looks a little bit like what you had in mind. You want to squeeze the plasma using a magnetic bottle, essentially, in confinement. It's going to run for as long as you can keep it confined so that you don't have instabilities that break up that confinement. And that's going to put power into the grid. You should think of that a little bit like a jet engine. So There's a combustion process with fuel coming in and power going out, and it does what it needs to do. The inertial confinement fusion, or ICF approach, is a lot more like your car engine. You have a brief explosion, then you have another one, then you have another one. And it happens, if it happens often enough, the average power that you get out is enough to take that power, put it into, say, a blanket of water, and run a steam cycle. So you would run a power plant just like you do today, except instead of burning a hydrocarbon or a fossil fuel, you're firing these targets quickly. And because of the way that the systems scale physically and what the economics look like, you have to be able to do it at about 10 times per second. And you have to get about 20 times more energy per implosion out than what we get right now. So that number can sound like a lot, 20 times more than what we get right now. But that is a teeny tiny bit. In fact, we're probably down to about 10 times more than what we need right now, the way that we have increased the yields. We started in 2012, 2013 at about a more than 100, depending how you count, maybe even 1,000 times lower yield or energy out than what we have right now. So we've come a factor of, let's say, 500 up from where we are. We have only a factor of 10 left to go. That's really not very far. That's for the energy purpose. But really what we're doing today, the mission that is fully functional, fully operating, is the one that takes care of the stockpile and lets us answer real questions about the way our systems work.
Right. And on the ignition, that last factor of 10, it's not only closing that gap, but being able to do it 10 times a second. And what is the challenge there?
The challenges are a few. One, you got to be able to do it with that kind of confidence that you think you can do it every time that you pull the trigger on the laser. Two, you need to have a laser driver that can operate at that frequency. So I told you we have high rep rate lasers that can do that. They can't do it at the energies that are required to cause the fusion ignition. So you're going to have to get that repetition rate laser up to the energy that can do fusion, or take a fusion energy laser and get it rep rated so that it can happen that frequently. If you do solve that problem, the next problem that you have is that you need a target in front of that laser at 10 hertz. So that means you have to have been able to build out a target at 10 times per second. Right now, our targets are exquisitely scientifically engineered pieces of micro machinery that take us months to build. You got to get that operation down to effectively you can do it at hertz, and it needs to cost about 25 cents per target or so. Put that in front of a laser. So there are hurdles, and DOE, the fusion energy science world, is really interested in building out a successful ecosystem for fusion energy for the United States. So there's a really broad and vigorous startup community. Lawrence Livermore is working with those folks to share the lessons that we've learned, to make them more capable, and to close the gap between what we do on the science side for the stockpile and what we've learned that can then be taken up by private partners to make that work for inertial fusion energy.
And you're optimistic that'll happen, or
yeah?
I mean, is it just an engineering problem, or are there more fundamental questions that need to be answered?
That's the exciting part of ignition. There was a fundamental worry before we ignited that for the first time that there could be hidden physics mechanisms or scaling issues in there that meant that a 2 megajoule laser was physically incapable of igniting deuterium tritium thermonuclear fuel. That is off the table. We can absolutely 100% doing it. Now it's a matter of quantitative degree. So then in that sense, yeah, it's just engineering. Okay, but that engineering is really hard. It's super challenging. You've got to work on laser technologies. You've got to work on target technologies. You've got to put that capability inside a viable fusion power plant. And we have partners that are thinking about all of those things. So you asked me if I'm optimistic. Yeah, I'm absolutely optimistic. But you have to be an optimist to work in fusion. That's the way it goes. There's an old joke, which anybody in the audience, maybe you've even heard, that fusion power is 30 years away and always will be, right? Yeah, so that's sort of tried, and it's a little bit old. People used to say fusion ignition is 30 years away and always will be, but it's not. We did it, so that joke is retired. So now you can make it about fusion power, but you can't make it about ignition. What I will say is that I'm pretty confident that in my children's lifetime, we will see fusion power on the grid. If you really press me, I'd be more optimistic than that. But it's not a tomorrow problem. Because it is, quote unquote, just engineering, it's a matter of will from the federal government. With sufficient resources, the United States can go do this. The current administration has put out a bold decadal vision in fusion, saying that in the next decade, we are going to greatly advance this. With sufficient funding, the United States can go do this. We can do it first, and we're the only country that can do it.
Yeah. On the other, the containment fusion, where you have a plasma that you're containing with magnets or whatever, is that ahead of ignition of the? Is it ICF?
Yeah, the convenient terms for everybody to think of is there's the magnetic confinement or MCF side, and there's the inertial confinement or ICF side. We are complementary to each other. We will say the magnetic confinement community is farther ahead in the engineering. So giant machines like tokamaks are easier to imagine. They're further along. They exist in the world. They're not yet fully functional. They're not capable of confining their plasmas for long enough to get more energy out of them than what they're putting in from their confinement scheme. We, on the other hand, know that we can get more energy out than what we put in by the laser driver, but then that would have to be coupled to a really complicated engineering machine that fires at 10 hertz, and we're a long way away from that. So we are in, if there were four corners of a 2D matrix, we're in opposite corners. What really makes sense for the United States, push both of these forward. We can lead in both of these capabilities, and we absolutely should. It's what makes me optimistic about both approaches.
Are any other countries as close behind the U.S.?
Yeah, in the magnetic world, there's a large international collaboration on the largest project called ITER, which is in Europe, that has participants from around the world, and that is the biggest, most ambitious view of what you can do with magnetic confinement. It's an enormous engineering project, and it's slow to come to fruition, but they're working very hard to do that. The US is a player, but we don't dominate that space. Absolutely critical. My magnetic confinement colleagues will probably say that they're at the forefront leading that, and that's probably not wrong. In inertial confinement fusion, we are the only game in the world. There are other laser systems around the world that are under development. We have partners in France that have built out a laser system called the Laser Megajoule, or LMJ, that is very much a NIF-like system. There are lasers that scale that have been considered and partially built in China, and Russia is considering a similar system. So there's a geopolitical angle to the way that these are working out. Some of them US allies, some of them US adversaries, but we are much farther ahead in the ICF world than the US is ahead on the magnetic world.
Yeah, although this isn't a military technology. I mean, this is for the production of electricity ultimately.
That's right. No, there's no military interest in using our National Ignition Facility to take that and put energy on some target for military purposes. The closest thing to military uses is the science that we can understand to take care of the strategic deterrent, to make sure that we have functional weapon systems that do what they're supposed to do, that always, never that I talked about. Again, there, though, the goal is make sure that no one ever uses these systems. They're to stay parked and dry where they're supposed to be, because it's clear that there's no winning outcome for anyone should they use them. The National Ignition Facility is part of that deterrent mission. In fact, we use that to show the world openly, look how capable our scientific staff is in this endeavor. If we are that capable out in our open capabilities, you should understand what we do when we're not telling you exactly what's going on. So the scientists and the team that I have the privilege to work with, we are part of the strategic deterrent. This is what our nation state is capable of. Everyone else should understand.
Yeah. One of the things that interests me about that is the simulation and the use of the supercomputers or clusters, or I'm not sure how it's configured.
Yeah.
To do these simulations. So not only for fusion research, but for biotechnology research or anything. Can you talk about the computers behind those simulations? Are they physical computers at the lab? Are they is it cloud infrastructure that's being orchestrated? How do you how can you describe that?
Yeah, so I'd like to talk about two things. I'll talk about our current compute capability and then where we're going in AI to accelerate and transform the capability for the country. Currently, the Department of Energy maintains the biggest integrated precision compute systems on the planet. Lawrence Livermore has the most capable machine room for scientific computing on the planet. For a feeling of scale, what does that look like? There are more GPUs and CPUs in Livermore than you can probably imagine. Our largest machine, which will turn on sometime probably this month, being built currently as we speak, will have more than 30,000 graphics processing units or GPUs inside it. That machine room by itself, which has more than a half dozen supercomputers in it, pulls in 85 megawatts of power. 85 megawatts is about the size of a power plant that pushes a Navy sub through the water, roughly, for scale. You can move a boat through the ocean at considerable speed doing that. We use all of that power and energy to do math really, really, really fast. That math provides the capability to do simulations at the micron, sometimes the atomic level scale, to understand what happens in weapon systems, to do biological missions of the way that proteins fold or small molecules interact with biological systems. And then those same systems that are great for the high precision scientific computing, we have engineered to be also good for the low precision AI. So what AI really needs is not the high precision, what we would call double precision scientific computing. It needs lower precision, but it needs it fast and in a repetitive way, doing similar operations over and over again. That's what graphics processing units are for. The DOE has been at the forefront of designing new architectures to do exactly that. In fact, the GPUs that our tech industry and AI world are working with today, much of that technology has grown out of co-design between our vendor partners like NVIDIA or AMD and the Department of Energy, where we showed them where we need to go. They've helped show us how to get there, and we've designed together GPUs for computation that is more than just graphics processing on your laptop. So it's something that we're proud of at DOE, and we used our exascale computing project, trying to get to exascale or 10 to the 18 operations per second, we've used that capability jointly, that co-design, to build out this capability for the world. That's great. How do we use AI? How does it drive the future? So the computers that we have at that enormous scale, so tens of thousands of GPUs, each of those GPUs costs as much as a car. These are sort of $30,000 kinds of commodities that we're putting tens of thousands of them together. Our next supercomputer is order of magnitude $500 million machine that we use to do this compute. It does the science, but it also does the AI, which opens up that mission space that we opened with. I can do all of the scientific computing on the simulation capability. Then I can train a model on top of that, admit that that's not perfect, and then retrain it and pull in the experimental data. But the same computer that can run the science can also run the AI on top of it. We're building out strong public-private partnerships with people that are vendors, or with companies that are vendors, also with companies that are in the software world. So we're exploring relationships with names that you recognize, like Google, OpenAI, and other folks, all just relationships that we're starting to build. We also have strong partnerships with users of that capability to help us understand what we also don't know, like the GEs or the Boeings or the Mercedes of the world. So there's an entire ecosystem. DOE is highly capable of moving this forward, but we can't do it alone. What does make us special is the scale that we operate. So here at the SCSP AI Expo, we have rolled out from DOE an initiative that we call FAST, Foundations in AI for Science, Security, and Technology. FAST is aimed at taking what we understand about the AI world and scaling it up to US nation scale, being able to do things that are transformational for strategic deterrent, for bioresilience, for decision-making in the intelligence community. What we need is the capability to build frontier AI models on demand and at will, aimed at national security missions, and we need to be the first to do it. It's absolutely critical. There's a global race on taking that compute technology that we built here in the US and doing transformational things with it. There are adversaries in the world, especially China, who have declared that they will dominate in the AI space by 2030.
Right.
The National Security Commission on AI took a hard look at this around 2021 to 2022, and they said in this global scale, around there were 6 structural features that they looked at, and most players in the world cannot compete with the US, save China. China's ahead in half the features. The US is ahead in half the features. Who wins is a toss-up. So the Department of Energy has stepped up and said, we know how to do computing at enormous scale. We understand what the national security needs are for the country. We're in a unique position to bring together the compute capability and that awareness of those missions and put it together and do something productive. So FAST is the answer to that. It's a way that we do 4 things for the country at huge scale. One is take huge amounts of data and do something transformational, from advanced light sources, accelerators, fusion facilities, you name it, the world's best experiments. Combine that with simulation data. So data is one. The second is a simulation and computing capability. We have the largest computers in the entire world. Data plus those computers is a really nice environment to do a third thing, which is build out transformational AI models. If you do all of those 3 things, data, compute, and models, you can make tools for AI that then transform the 4th piece, which is critical applications. Those are the national mission areas that I'm talking about. So the FAST effort is this very ambitious whole of nation effort led by DOE to go transform what we're doing in AI. It will be pointed at things like we started the conversation with, at fusion. If we want to go get that for taking care of the stockpile, we've got it now. We can push up the capabilities to expand into new ranges. We could think about inertial fusion energy. We could think about challenge problems that were unthinkable even 5 years ago. There's a concept that we think of that we give the name the 1-month medicine. How would you go from seeing an emergent biology threat to the definition of a therapy for it, to the production of that medication, to knowing it's safe in humans on a timescale as short as 1 month? We can't do that right now, but we can see a path. And to do that, it takes the precision compute that we have, it takes the AI capability and the joining of those 2 things. And you got to go to experimental facilities. If I can imagine a molecule that might be helpful, I also have to take an automated chemistry system and make that goop, see whether or not it is just goop or whether it's a useful therapeutic. If it's not, then I got to go back into that loop and do it kind of like the high repetition rate laser. Maybe not at 10 hertz, every 10 seconds, but can I make a molecule every hour, every couple of hours, and not take a team of chemists and scientists a much, much longer time to make the first go and then rewind it and have a much longer loop.
Two questions. One on the models. Somebody asked, Andrew Ross Sorkin at one of the talks panels here asked, I think the CIA director, whether the U.S. is building models, whether it has its own proprietary secret model, kind of a Manhattan Project of AI.
Right.
And he said no, because the expertise exists in the private sector, and that the government funds the private sector develops these powerful models, and then the government essentially buys them back.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about with this compute technology, for example, at your lab, are you building models yourselves?
We are. So yeah, let me be really clear about what that question was precisely. The question was, are you building large language models that are proprietary to the US government in secret that nobody knows about? And the answer was no. I will say from the DOE perspective, we are entirely uninterested in competing with OpenAI or Anthropic or anybody else making those kinds of large language models. We're in fact legally prohibited from doing so. We don't have any interest in doing that. We are making US proprietary models for all the things that are not language, for not learning the grammar of English, but learning the grammar of chemistry, for learning the grammar of physics, and building out maybe even transformer style architectures, which are what's behind GPT
Right.
and other things, but for building out molecules for the generation of a new alloy for advanced manufacturing, or a new protein for an antibody, or a new small molecule for a drug for cancer, all things that we're actually doing. Those models are not secret in the sense that the question sort of intimated at, but we're doing it at nation scale, and we are doing it with data that only the US has access to. And it is a transformational capability. It's something that no other country on the planet can do. Inside the Department of Energy, we have a workforce of about 60,000 highly trained scientific staff. We have the largest physical science database in the world. We have the most capable scientific machines, both experimental and computing, for producing more data. And our FAST effort is designed exactly to take all of that data, all of our expertise, all of our compute, and build out models that only the US can have for US advantage. So it's not quite as spooky as the question, is the US doing something secret in the background? We are quite openly going out to seize global advantage and do something transformational for the US, especially aimed at satisfying our national security needs.
Yeah. And those models then, would they be made available to the private sector, or are they for use in national security and therefore?
Quite possible. Some of the most exciting work that we've done has been in public-private partnership with, say, private partners like AstraZeneca for developing antibody therapies. We are interested in sharing those models. We are not interested in sharing them if we think that something bad could be done with them. So we will be very careful and highly responsible about what AI safety and security looks like. We're going to respect everything in the AI executive order, and we're going to go out and do this super carefully. So in the biology space, it's very easy to imagine a model that interrupts biological pathways so that you don't propagate disease. So I want to stop a COVID-19 infection.
Mm-hmm.
Great. The same kind of tool could be used to interrupt biological pathways that are critical for staying alive. I'm going to have to think twice about releasing a model that could be used for both purposes. Those sort of dual use ideas are at the forefront of what we're considering doing. And that extends to all kinds of models. That's not unique to DOE. When we think about building out these AI models, we have to think about what people with good intent are going to do with them. We have to think about what people with ill intent are going to do with them. It's an open research question to decide how to protect those models from doing things that are harmful while enabling them to do things that are beneficial. The Department of Energy is in a unique position to see what is harmful in scientific technologies, to understand what's beneficial, to have expertise and understanding what AI and high performance computing can do, and to start pushing the frontier of the ways that we can release the beneficial things without unleashing the harmful things. It's not easy. So in our safety practices, we do three things. We assess the risks to see what we think the options are. Can we do something safely, or is there a vulnerability? Second, we put in what are known to be best practices. So we protect models. We share them when it makes sense. We don't share them. We may share data. We may not. Then the third thing that we do is do frontier research and understanding what is the next best thing we can do in the future. And we drop those into the models, and then we do that safely in the future. This is an iterative cycle that we just have to run over and over again. Biology is a place where you have to think about it immediately because the access that people can have for doing good and for doing ill with those things. But we have to think about it for the nuclear stockpile. We have to think about it for energy production, for manufacturing, you name it.
Yeah. And you were talking about transformer-based models, not necessarily language models. Not trained on human or natural language, but DNA is a language, and there are certainly other languages in quantum physics and in terms of codes that can be configured in different ways. Is DNA research one of the areas that this is being applied?
Yep.
And are these models? I know that I'm a layman, and in layman terms, people get hung up on parameter size because that's the measure that
you can count it.
Yeah. Are they larger than the existing language models, or will they be larger than existing language models?
They are not yet larger than the biggest language models. So the biggest language models are trillion parameter class models. So think about GPT-4, which is a 1.x something parameter model. And the similar largest models are coming out at the sort of trillion parameter scale. The scientific models that are aiming to do similar things are far smaller than that right now. The challenge is to build out architectures that are useful. They might be transformer based. Before doing that, you have to sort of create the grammar, the language that goes into them. So molecules like DNA is a very long molecule, even smaller molecules, they're a really nice test bed for doing that. They're a little different than language. Language is super linear. So we have words that go from left to right in English across the page, and we know how to read them in sequence. A molecule exists in 3D space, and there are ways to project that into something that looks like language, a string called smile strings, but you lose the 3D nature of the chemistry, and that's really important for the physics and chemistry of how atoms interact in molecules. So before you build out these enormous models like you do for language, you should start with smaller molecules and then put a lot of effort on the 3D representations of that. So we have a project called FLASK, which is a semi-tortured acronym that I won't recall, but the FLASK project at Livermore, led by a colleague, Brian Van Essen, is building out frontier level models for understanding what representations of molecules look like. Can we build out these transformer style or other architecture models that understand the chemistry grammar and then can do predictions with them? But you don't only want to predict, will this molecule hang together, but you want to predict, how do I synthesize it? What are the chemical precursors that I need? What are the synthesis pathways that I need to activate? Is this a safe molecule to interact with? If it's not, can I make small tweaks that make it accomplish my goal, but are also safe so that I don't have to wear specialized personal protection equipment when I handle it? Or if it's a medication, it can be put into animals or it can be put into people. So these models need to come a long way to get up to the kinds of scales where you see the sort of large language model, GPT kind of behavior. But we understand what the capabilities are. So we're pushing very hard right now at the small scale to get the ingredients together, just like we did with language models. With the attention is all you need paper and the transformer architecture was not built at a time where we were doing trillion parameter scale stuff. We just understood that that model was transformational. And when you go to scale, you get all of these amazing things that come with it. We would like to repeat that, start with the chemistry case, do it at small scale, build out the language underneath it. We have all that data at DOE, build those models at small scale, and then go to large scale. That FAST program that I talked about, this nation scale effort, is part of the build it at small scale and then scale it up to the enormous nation scale to give the US competitive advantage that you shouldn't be able to get anywhere else.
Yeah, on the 3D understanding the shape of molecules or the 3D structure of molecules, Google just came out with AlphaFold 3, and we were talking yesterday about some of the work that you guys have done on protein modeling or molecule modeling. are you beyond AlphaFold 3, or do you use AlphaFold 3 when something like that appears, or is there some complementary relationship between your research and that research? And is that research, your research, public in the way that AlphaFold 3 is somewhat public?
Right. So we do use other people's protein folding models. Our group that works on a project called Guide, which is a partnership with DOE and DoD, uses a model from Facebook AI Research, owned by Meta. There's an open model out there that's really fantastic. We build on top of that, or really underneath that, the underlying scientific data from high precision physical and chemistry simulations from what we call density functional theory or molecular dynamics theory about the way that molecules stick together to inform what proteins generated by that model look like in terms of their capabilities, their safety, a variety of other things downstream. And we join that into a predictive capability for models that we want to look at in the future. We don't use AlphaFold or AlphaFold 3. The models that we do have now had some nice features that made them very usable. We will look at large models like that in the future. We also, as we just talked about, are growing some of our own in-house models that we think have options based on sort of transformer style architectures to do things that are like what AlphaFold and others are doing, but that are kind of specialized for the missions that we need to go after. To the open question, if we think that there's not a really negative dual use opportunity, and we're really confident that there are good benefits to be had without ill, then we very often share these. We will publish our information about what we're doing with it. Sometimes we will stop short of sharing all of our code if we think we just can't be confident that someone's not going to do something really dangerous with it.
Right. Yeah.
But there's very little sense that there's no sense that we're going to keep this proprietary just to keep it proprietary. The only reason we will keep it is if we think that there could be harm done with it. Our instinct as a federally funded research and development center is to push this out for public good. We share with private industry as much as we can. We have a very long history in DOE of developing technologies, then giving them away to the private scale, to the private sector to scale up and build out for U.S. advantage. So if we can, we will give that to people.
Yeah. I just had a conversation about the National AI Resource, NAIR. Are you guys participating in that? Is your compute infrastructure part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Through DOE, a good fraction of the computational cycles that are available in this first round of NAIR, the winners of which were just announced,
right,
come from DOE computational capabilities at Oak Ridge and other places inside the DOE national laboratories. So we have a collaborative research with NSF and with NAIR. NAIR is one piece of the puzzle for building out AI for the nation. That gives academic faculty and graduate students access to slices of compute time where they can learn what it looks like to operate at large scale. They can start to build out science and AI workflows and train a workforce and build out their research in ways that they couldn't otherwise. What it's not is what FAST aims to be. FAST is putting out lighthouse or guide star problems that say, this is what huge transformational science looks like. Interdisciplinary problems at very large scale. If you are trained to operate at the smaller scale of the NSF NAIR funding, those skills can be brought to bear in interdisciplinary teams to do larger, more emergent things than you could imagine operating at that other scale. They're absolutely complementary efforts. NAIR is fantastic and not enough. FAST is transformational, but needs the workforce transformation that comes from NAIR and the things that academics can do with that time. And together, we build out students, professors, national level researchers that can come into the national laboratories, and we can do transformational things together. So they're very complementary.
Yeah. Do you have trouble in recruitment? I was at NeurIPS, in December.
Yeah.
And people were saying that, I don't know if it's true, but people who certainly know more than I do, we're saying that OpenAI is now offering $1 million starting salary for top-level PhDs. I can't imagine the U.S. government can afford that. Or maybe they can. I don't know.
Well, I don't make $1 million. So that'll be my first answer. It's a tough competition. So you can work in the AI space. You can go to our private partners in the world and you can make more money. That's not debatable. You will do that. We do have to compete with them. We do still bring in a pretty steady stream of hires. We do that because of the compelling missions that we have. Let's say you walk into our laboratory. What have I done for the past 2 decades of my life? I've used the largest computers on the planet to operate the largest laser in the world, using the most sophisticated AI algorithms together to provide, for the first time in human history, more energy out of a fusion implosion than what we put into it with the laser. Mm-hmm. That sounds like science fiction.
Yeah.
You can't do that anywhere else on the planet. You would have a hard time paying me enough money to leave that to go do some of the other things, not begrudging our industry partners all the very cool things that they do. What we have is the compelling mission to work on. Yeah. We have to use that to our advantage, but it's not easy. Take my particular case. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory is located in the Bay Area. We're a 40-minute drive from the heart of Silicon Valley. Do we lose people to our industry partners? Absolutely. Is it hard to recruit people? Absolutely. But we're working on it. Our FAST program is part of showing the world what we do for good at scale for US advantage and making a home for people who want to do that kind of transformational stuff. We cannot pay them what industry pays them, but we can offer a different kind of compensation, and we just have to be competitive in that space. We will seek out through DOE ways to pay competitive salaries. There are things that we're thinking about to make us look more attractive. On a dollar for dollar basis, I don't think we'll ever win. It's got to be monetary compensation and something else. Yeah. I will say that we've had people leave our laboratory, go work at places like Facebook, and then come back. Yeah. It's a pretty attractive place to work.
Yeah, well, I remember the National Security Commission on AI was talking about these sort of, I can't remember what they were calling them, but national service programs where people from industry could go into a national lab, work for 6 months with some agreement with Meta or whoever their employer is, and then go back because they get a lot of knowledge.
Yep.
It's kind of benefits both sides. Are those programs active yet?
There are pockets throughout the government where they work. They work pretty well in the cyberspace. They call them reserve forces.
Right.
Like you would think of the Army Reserve or the Air Force Reserve for the military fighting forces. The idea is exactly that. Instead of working for your day job and then spending a weekend working for your Army or Air Force Reserve training, you would work at Facebook or NVIDIA and then spend some time working at a national laboratory, for example. That's one of the most forward-leaning things that you can think of. I thought it was pretty prescient of NSC AI to suggest that, and I'm a huge fan of the idea. At scale, that doesn't exist yet. I'd like it to.
Yeah. How do you feel about the competition? I mean, everyone's obsessed with China. I spent a lot of my life in China. Are they doing similar things? Do they have the same kind of national compute infrastructure that the national labs have in the United States or the DOE has? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of comparisons we should make between the US and China, some of which look favorable for the US, some of which look favorable for China. In terms of their ambitions, as I said earlier, their ambitions are the same as ours. We will try to lead. There's a concept that I call escape velocity. My firm belief is that the nation that first establishes a clear advantage in AI for designing their science and technology and national security capability will not be caught. They will establish escape velocity. They'll be out ahead. They'll be able to accelerate harder, and you cannot catch up to someone who does that. So in my view, the United States needs to be first. It's a neck and neck race right now, so there's no clear winner. China has said that by 2030, they will be the clear forefront winner. So we should think about everything that we're doing at nation scale against that backdrop. Let's look at compute capability as a proxy for that conversation. The things that what we can say, if you look at high performance computing, is that China used to be a significant laggard in the number of high performance computing cycles that they could put together. Now they have more than half of the computational cycles that you can rank in the top 500 supercomputers in the world. They've stopped, in fact, participating openly sometimes in that conversation, but we know that they have the ambition and the will and maybe have already accomplished having more cycles available to them in high-performance computing than what we have.
What do you mean by cycles?
Cycles, sorry, that's the ability to do numerical operations. So each computer chip can do some kind of multiplication of numbers, some number of those multiplications every second, every cycle of the clock, you can do those multiplications. They can do more math than we can. We will also say in the US that we do much higher quality math. So there are things that we can do at high precision that our systems are capable of that in general the Chinese systems are not capable of. So it's not totally fair. They're a little bigger, they're a little clunkier. Ours are not quite as fast, but they're much more precise in their capability. Ours also, because of the DOE investment in computing, tend to be far more energy efficient than the general approach in China. So right now, we're having a national conversation about data centers and the amount of energy that they pull down. We're reaching a place where data centers are going to be starved by their capability to be powered. Some of our hyperscaler friends are looking for ways to co-locate as many computers, as many GPUs as they can, without bringing the grid down in the state that they operate in. Being able to produce energy efficient GPUs, like DOE has helped our industry partners to generate, is going to be an advantage in being able to power those with an electric grid. So all of this comes together in a picture that asks, how much compute can you have? How much energy does it require? Does your grid infrastructure support being able to put that together? Can you do it in a way that's not climate destroying? Is your energy clean in the way that you can produce it, or is it not? This all gets wrapped up into a notion of sort of techno-economic competition between the two countries. It's in vogue to talk about China as an adversary in that sense, but it's very real. They're the only competitor out there that operates at that scale. And they've clearly stated they have the ambition to win that race, because right now in the compute world, if you look at something like OpenAI has done, they are turning power into GDP, into domestic product. What you need to drive that engine is more power into the grid, more efficient computers for turning that power more effectively into economic product. Don't turn that off. Win that race. That's what we're trying to do in the US. This is not lost on China.
Yeah. Is there something that you've been talking about here that I haven't touched on?
No, actually, you've guided us through pretty much the whole experience of what's going on through the really wonderful SCSP Expo that we're at and the Ash Carter Exchange that we're co-located next to. It's a good chance to recap. One thing that I want people to understand is that if we had our preference in the world, the Department of Energy would be probably called the Department of Science.
Right.
We do more physical science funding in the US than any other agency. We operate at huge scale. We have as our responsibility laser focus, no pun intended, on national security missions, from the nuclear stockpile to bioresilience to making very critical decisions for the intelligence community. And we do it with very sophisticated scientific underpinning on both compute and experiment, and now with a really leading capability in AI. And we're moving further. This fast effort is to take that capability and build out a transformational AI mechanism for the United States to make sure that we get out in front, that we have escape velocity, that we lead for national advantage, and that we're not at a disadvantage on that global scale. So I appreciate the conversation that you led me through. We've touched on the science and we've touched on the compute. And what I hope people who are listening to this take away is that the US can do a spectacular transformative thing in this moment. We need only have the will to do it. And I think we're very close.
Quantum, is Lawrence Livermore working, or are the national labs, what are they doing on quantum? Are you a quantum optimist? And I would imagine that the compute power that you've been talking about would be important for in the simulation power for solving some of the issues.
Yeah, I'm a quantum enthusiast. In my view, quantum computing is still a physics experiment that's very close to becoming a computational capability. We have researchers who are working on both the physical side of building out quantum computing systems and on the algorithm side of developing algorithms for quantum computers to do the kinds of scientific things we're interested in that we've done with traditional computing. Christy Beck leads our Center for Quantum Computing, which was just launched at Livermore openly. In fact, last week, I think. We've done the research for a long time, but we've got an investment in making this a real path forward in computing. So you should check her and her team's work out. But I think it will be transformational. It's not a today solution, though. Today, it's about GPUs, lots of GPUs, how to power them, how to take algorithms that we understand today and make them work. Quantum computing offers the ability to potentially transform that for some types of computing, not for all. So we need to learn what that admixture looks like, the balance between traditional computing, von Neumann architectures, things like that, and quantum computing and other ways to move data to compute and vice versa. So I'm not a pessimist about quantum computing. It's just a future technology that's really exciting, not yet today's solution, but we have absolutely got to push on that. It is another frontier. Do not be behind on frontiers. It would be a mistake.
Hi, I wanted to jump in and give a shout out to our sponsor, SysAid. SysAid's vision is to lead organizations on a transformative journey toward AI-driven organizational processes and services, infusing intelligence and ease in the workday with SysAid Copilot. SysAid orchestrates service management across the organization using generative AI that taps into specialized data accumulated from thousands of customers and millions of users. With zero setup required, SysAid's conversational AI manages employees' requests, assists with queries, and accelerates the resolution of issues. IT pros and service management leaders become pioneers, enabling productivity to thrive. Now employees can do what they're meant to do, and organizations are free to fulfill their purpose. Give SysAid a try.